Dr. Betty Kovacs, welcome to Podcastina.
Thank you so much.
Well, I would love to just start with a little bit on your background and what it is you do.
Well, I've done quite a few things. I've lived long enough to do a few things. Um, but the major part of my life was in teaching in college, and I loved that. I loved being with the students because they were always so curious and had thousands of questions, and we had the energy and the will to seek answers. So I taught literature and writing, and then I formed a mythology class. So that allowed us to go into other people's spiritual traditions. And then after teaching that and fairy tale, because fairy tales are highly concentrated symbolic language from the soul. And I would have to say from the outset is that this symbolic language is our native language. It's from the right brain. And it isn't an arbitrary language. It really is organized by the deep structures of the mind or psyche. So it's not just an arbitrary um, constellation, you might say, by the left brain. It is something that is organized at the soul level. So when you study fairy tale or myths, you're really learning one's native language. So I spent quite a lot of time in that. But then I realized that before the myths came the ritual and the shamanic practices. So then I started studying that, and I went to South America twice to work with shamans. And so there was a lot to talk about there with students after going there. And because that's actual practice, actual experience, not left brain discussion of it. And then when I retired, I started writing.
I would love to start really macro, which is could you give me your working definition of what a shaman is?
Yes, and that's very, very important because shamanic practices actually means actual individual inner experience, one's own experience. And of course, the rituals, the techniques are structured in such a way that we were able to relax the left brain that's so highly focused on the outer world and allow the right brain and the heart to open us to a higher dimension or a higher consciousness. So the techniques are to do precisely that. And it's our own inner experience. And there's no orthodoxy. There's nothing you have to believe because it's what you experience. And that is really called later in our in civilization, it's called gnosis. That is, it means to know. And it's a knowing that is so deep, so profound that that is the proof itself. As they say, it's realer than real. And the left brain will stand over to the side and say, yes, but I want proof in the outer world. But that is not the proof for a shaman. For a shaman, what you experience is real. You know it. The interesting thing is you do know it. You just know that's real. And of course, you spend your life with these experiences trying to connect the dots. And sometimes you'll have a visionary experience in which dots are connected beautifully. So it's a lifetime of inner experience, and valuing that experience and trying to understand it are always in a larger context.
And what is the shaman's role if you were to say find one and work with them? What does that look like?
Well, it's a leader, you might say, in practice of techniques. Uh, Shamanism actually began all around the world, interestingly, about 40,000 BCE, you can imagine. And that was at the time we were beginning to realize that if we did certain things, that other things happened. So the shaman is practiced in those techniques, and much of it is repetitive. Rituals are often repetitive because the repetition will cause the left brain to relax and kind of step out of the picture a little bit and allow other components of the brain to work. So a shaman is a leader and one who knows the techniques, has practiced using these techniques for higher experience for a long time. And then he can help others to go use those techniques and awaken. And of course, at a point, you wouldn't need a shaman. just like a medium, people like to go to mediums to get in touch with people who have passed to the other side. And a good medium will always say, this is something we all have the latent, at least, potential to do, is be in contact with other dimensions of reality. But until you get to the point that you can do it, I'm here to help you. And that's kind of true of a shaman, too.
What do you find are people's misconceptions around shamanism and the work that they do? I'm sure there's like a reaction whenever you bring it up. And what are people misunderstanding about what this world is?
Well, today it's less so than, let's say, a few decades ago. Uh, when I was teaching in college, uh, one didn't say such things. you know, it was like, what? I mean, it's kind of a savage, silly technique. And besides, there's nothing anyway, because those who, in the Western world, we've been so brainwashed for centuries to believe that there's nothing that's really important in the brain except the left brain, which analyzes and looks out at the world. It can do all types of putting things together. But the interesting thing is that all of the information in the left brain comes from the right brain. And it simply analyzes it, looks at it, takes it apart, puts it together. But it does not have, and this is so important, our left brain, and that's what we're trained in the West. The left brain does not have the ability to see the context. It cannot see meaning or purpose, and it doesn't have feeling or love. And so, since we've been isolated in the left brain, no wonder we've had a worldview in which there's nothing but matter. We're a fluke of nature. We're completely unimportant. When you're dead, we're dead. And there's nothing else. There's nothing but matter, which is perhaps the most insane perspective, and called it science. A good science would never say that we can scientifically prove there's nothing but matter, because they had never checked it. They didn't have the tools to check it. Now, with quantum physics, they can. And quantum physics is a departure from the past, because quantum physics knows we live in a multi-dimensional world. And we, the human being, has access to those higher dimensions. So, but earlier, and still, I'm sure, to a great degree among many people, the shaman was just some kind of foolish, primitive person who thought that he or she was doing something that was significant or meaningful, and the rest of the fools followed along. So when Europeans came to this country, they saw them as savages because they themselves had no concept of higher dimensions of consciousness. But I think that's changing. Since quantum physics, we finally have a science that begins to understand that we have many brain components, and that for some reason or other, and I know why, we have been isolated into the left brain, and that has weakened us and made us violent, narcissistic, uh, gives a feeling of superiority. It just doesn't have what it needs. The brain was developed, the left brain and the right brain developed first. The right brain and the left brain, these two great hemispheres, are incredibly beautiful, but they have evolved to work together. And in mythology, when they work together, it's called the sacred marriage, because they are constantly in contact. The right brain has the information, gives it to the left brain, it analyzes it, takes it apart, puts it back together, gives it to the right brain. And then that can flow through the heart, because we now know that the heart is conscious. It is the greatest organ of consciousness that the brain has. It gives more information to the brain than the brain gives to it. And we also know what our ancestors knew, that the heart, opens us to the consciousness of the cosmos. We have that ability, but we've been telling ourselves for centuries we don't. So our ability has atrophied. And I think now we're beginning to awaken those abilities and begin to ask questions. So it's less likely that someone in my college would make fun of shamanism. But I remember at one time, one professor said to me, well, whatever you do, don't mention the word shamanism.
You're right. It's definitely become kind of more well known in the lexicon. I guess my concern, and maybe this is your concern too, and what is interesting about this conversation and driving people away from like the things that they would make fun of, is I think culturally people associate that word with like Burning Man and kind of like this movement of Like I have a friend who does a lot of ayahuasca. So that was like my intro. She like has a shaman that leads those ceremonies and whatnot. And I think people's affiliation to it right now, if they're not well versed in this, is probably more with those types of scenes, right? With like people that go to Burning Man festivals and perhaps like do psychedelics and things. Whereas what you're telling me about shamanism is it's so much more than that. It's kind of like a spiritual guidance that doesn't really have to do with these drugs. I mean, maybe these ceremonies are part of it and how people are becoming familiarized, but it sounds like what you're telling me is this is an ancient tradition that's so much bigger than that.
It is. It is. However, it also does include sacred plants. Not in
Mm-hmm.
all cases. It depends upon where the people live. For instance, the shaman in South Africa, the Bushmen, great group of spiritual people. They've are sometimes called the murdered people because they've been so violated, but they happy people and good, wonderful people. And most of them are shamans, and they do not use sacred medicine. They're in the desert, but they have all other kinds of techniques. But all around the world, there were always groups from probably even 40,000 BC and maybe earlier who did use the plants, and they don't look at them as the Western world often does. It's sacred, and their spirits, their consciousness in these plants. And when the human consciousness connects with them in a relationship, then there is a much higher consciousness possible. And I, of course, grew up not, well, at first place, in those years, we never heard about anything like that. But then as I began to learn more about shamanism and sacred plants, I wondered about it too. But when I went to South America, I was determined. If I'm teaching, I've got to know what I'm teaching. I was teaching about mystery schools throughout the world. Most of the mystery schools also use sacred plants, at least many of them did. So I thought, okay, I've got to know what's going on. Plus, I wanted to know. So I went to South America, and over the years, I have often worked with sacred plants. And it has to be done within a sacred context for sure. As as everything, when we enter into a relationship with another person to have a conversation, we also, however we enter into that relationship, has some effect on what happens. So what I realized is that yes, there are aspects to the plants that in the right context can open us to a consciousness that is so vast that we couldn't even have imagined it before. Uh, I was teaching during the 60s when students began to learn about these plants and began to very irresponsibly use them, of course, because they didn't have the shaman knowledge of how to go about it. And but all kinds of things were happening to them. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was not, depending upon a lot of different circumstances. But many people had profound experiences, and that began to change things. That began to change the way we looked at the world. And then there were some who thought, well, I've used the plants now, and they went to India and they learned very highly developed techniques of meditation and how to trigger altered states. So I think that what's happening to us now in the West is that we're waking up to, oh, well, we've been out of touch. We have been told that who we are is so naive and born out of such unforgivable ignorance that we better start trying to catch up. So we start learning more about our history and realizing how this happened, and learning about more and more techniques, uh, and with an honoring of all of them, but always realizing caution must be taken always when we're going to enter into other worlds with a higher frequency than what we live in on a daily basis.
Oh, absolutely. This might be a chicken or the egg question, but do you believe consciousness creates the brain, is in the brain, or is it totally separate?
Well, that's a good question, and it's one that the West has fumbled very badly, because if there's nothing but matter, then where does consciousness come from? And so the so-called scientific view was it's an epiphenomenon of the brain. In other words, something happens, we don't know what, but here it is, you know. But no, quantum physicists will now say consciousness is primary. Consciousness exists long before matter, and it is consciousness that creates matter. Consciousness creates matter. When matter dies, consciousness still exists. This is physics. This is quantum physics. And we know that now. So the old, and I have to say, it is a pitiful explanation of where consciousness came from, you know, is that it's an epiphenomenon of the brain. How can something give birth to something it isn't, you know? But they had to try to figure out how to make things match in a worldview that just simply was not based on reality. And there was a reason why scientists did not come up with anything better until quantum physics, because in 1660, when the Society for the Development of Science existed in England, the church had a strong hold on it, and it had been killing off anybody who had called themselves a mystic or visionary, or anyone in touch with higher consciousness, because it threatened the church. So when the Society for Science was established, they censored it. Those scientists, some of who were mystics, could not talk about anything but matter. So of course, they came up with the worldview that there's nothing but matter. So, but that's changing. That's changing. I would say, just massively changing around the world.
If our consciousness brings the matter in, creates our brains, then what happens to our conscious after we die?
That it continues. Consciousness is, and it's what they mean by it is primary. It exists and it creates matter. And when matter dies, consciousness is still there. And that was one of the major, or some of the major events in my own life, is that I had always been concerned about death because my mother's mother died when she was very young. Her mother died when she was young. Her father was also an orphan. His mother had, I was so afraid of losing my mother. And I mean, I loved everyone in my family, but she carried my soul. And we moved from place to place. So it was especially important that I had that loving anchor. So I worried about that a lot. And as I think many people do, but you know, as I began to learn these things, I think, well, this really, it has to continue to exist. But I hadn't experienced its continuation, so I still had questions. But our only child, our son, was killed in an automobile accident when he was 20, and my husband and I had contact with him. In fact, 2 years before his death, in dreams, we had dreams that he was going to die, and yet I
Oh, wow.
translated them as simply transformation, because death can also be a transformation. Now, my husband wasn't involved in this kind of thing at all. He was a businessman. He was very tolerant and kind, but that wasn't his concern. But then 2 weeks before his son was in the accident, he was in his office and he saw Pishti, our son's name was Pishti's car, on the side of the freeway, and he saw his body superimposed on the top of it. So he knew it was two different dimensions. So he knew that Pishti was dead. And then he heard himself say, "That's right, Pishti. It's almost time for you to do this." And that shocked him. And Pishti said to him, "That's right, Dad. I'll be out of the house for a little while." And then Ishvan, my husband, completely forgot it. It only came back when we happened to both be here when we got the call about the accident. It came back to him at that time. But he didn't tell me until after Pishti had died about that. But it was interesting because we had spontaneous experiences with his consciousness after he was dead, 1 week after, and then it started happening. And for my husband, who he didn't know what I was talking about, you know, and he started having profound visions. Going to work, coming back, he said it was like a tape recorder had been turned on, that all kinds of things. And Pishti would always say to him, "Dad, remember," like he was trying to get us to remember what we already knew. And so this was a very profound time in my life, because we we were having experiences individually, but both of us were having it with his consciousness. And he wanted us, first of all, to know he's okay, you know, this is fine, this is the way it works. And he wanted us to remember why we had chosen to be born at this time and what our work was, what we were doing. It just changed everything. And here was my husband, who didn't have an idea what I was talking about before. When he had this first long vision, he sat up on the side of the bed and he said, I will never look at the world in the same way again. Everything was changed. And so then I had the experience. Then I knew. I only could believe it before, that yes, that makes sense. Consciousness creates matter. And when matter's gone, consciousness exists. But there it was. His consciousness was there, and he knew it's as though we had made these choices. And he too had dreams. When he was 12, he saw how he was, he saw himself in a car accident. He saw himself on the other side. And he said, Mom, what do you think it means? And I said, well, you're about to go into puberty and you're changing, transforming. But I thought a lot about it. Then in the last year of his life, he had another dream of how he had died and that he was going out into the cosmos so fast, and then he'd come back and then he'd go. It was like a practice, of leaving. So once we had those experiences of his consciousness and what was going on, and he also wanted us to know what's going on in the world. This is a very, very strategic, very, very important time that the earth is going through. And many, many people are being born on the earth now who are becoming aware of this and helping us to get through it and realize who we are. Because the Jesus of the Nag Hammadi text said, I didn't come to save you. I came to remind you of who you are, that we have the components, we have within us the anatomy, the biology, which is, in Greg Braden's words, a bridge to our divinity. We are divine, we are immortal, and we are creators. And that's what we have to awaken to, unless we want our species to be destroyed through technology and transhumanism. So it is our son crossed over in 71, he's born in 71, 91. And he was saying, this is crucial. The species is in danger. And each individual has work to do to prevent that.
Wow, that's incredible. Having gone through that and getting basically tangible proof of consciousness beyond physical life, did that serve to unburden you from fear of death, or what did that do for your perspective on death?
It made all the difference in the world. Yes, I no longer have fear of death at all. It doesn't mean that there isn't pain, because when we love someone who's here in a physical body, you can have a cup of coffee with them, you can talk with them, you can be with them. That's gone. But so, yeah, there is grief for that, but we know that that person is still creating, that this is life. We are born into this dimension, and then we are born back into another dimension. We are creators, eternally creators, and we can create in whatever worlds we're capable of creating in. So yes, it changes everything. And for my husband too, who had never been interested in that, it is true. Once he had that experience, gnosis, the shamanic type of experience, it was like he was a changed man. It just has changed everything. And of course, we missed Pishti, but we also knew what he was up to, that he was working on the other side. And we were still working with him. And he was helping us remember.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I got goosebumps while you were talking about that. With everything you know about quantum physics and consciousness, how does that shape your views on manifestation?
Manifestation? Well, again, I go back to the fact that consciousness exists in other dimensions, and we we intend our creation. So that's why it's primary. It creates, it intends through consciousness to come into being. And I think that depending upon our level of development on the other side, we have, to that degree, we have ability to choose the time we come in, the parents we come in. Maybe, I don't know for sure, but maybe there are times when we're not highly, we're beginning the process, let's put it that way, that we might not make as many choices as later, but I'm not sure. We might always make those choices. But the intention to be, there's Jesus spoke Aramaic, and much in the Bible is badly translated. But there is a section in which there is like this tremendous longing on the other side to come into being, into time and space, of the divine. We are all divine, and the divine comes into being, longs to create individual selves. And we meet each other, we love each other, we play these wonderful games, and in that way we come to know ourselves. The divine becomes conscious of itself. So I think that manifestation is a longing to come into being and to create. And we're learning how to do that. We've gotten off track in the West, and I think that those in power wanted us to get off track because we can be controlled when we don't think we're anything. If we just think about the story that's in Genesis, I mean, I don't know how it could be held in a so-called sacred text, but here is the story about the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. God says, don't eat. You can have anything you want, but don't eat of that tree, which is consciousness. What God would not want us to be conscious. I used to think that even as a child, that is strange stuff. What's going on here? And then not only that, of course, we ate of it. Eve gave it to Adam. Prior to that story, the feminine was the tree. She was the fiery tree of life, wisdom. She was knowledge, enlightenment. And there are pictures of her, sketches and etchings and things like that, of her giving the fruit, and both the god and the goddess offering the fruit from the tree of enlightenment to whomever is ready. And so before this wretched story by those in power, before it is yours. That's what we're here for, to become conscious. When you eat of the tree, you know you're immortal, that you are divine and you are creative. But then when 621 BCE, that shaman mystic dimension or shaman mystic tradition in Judaism was destroyed by the Deuteronomists. And they created or constructed, I don't want to give them credit for even creating, they inverted the story and said, no, you're not supposed to eat of this. In other words, they wanted us unconscious and not to know who we are. And so then God threw us out of the garden. We're no good. We're flawed. We needed to be saved. Same story with the Deuteronomists today. We're not worthy of living in nature. We're not worthy. You've had your chance. You can't evolve without technology. We're going to transhumanize you. Same group of craziness. And so we were thrown out of the Garden of Eden. There was an angel with a sword to keep us from ever coming back in. And that, they said, it was a sin against God, which even was passed down to our children. This is a terrible power grab by the Deuteronomist and an inversion of the sacredness of who we really are. So in the West, we've pretty much just developed the left brain. And the Deuteronomists, their God said, don't create any art, no image of me, no art of anything on the land, in the oceans, up above. Well, what's that? Don't use the right brain, which opens you to the heart. So they knew what they were doing for power. So I think in the West, we've had a hard time because there's been a huge power grab to keep us from knowing who we are. Science then was influenced and censored. The Roman Church continued that. And then the French philosophers, while they had all kinds of ideals about our freedom and our independence and so on, they didn't have the right brain in the heart. So they can't maintain it without that. So here we are, but we're waking up now. We're waking up and we're realizing there's something seriously wrong with that story. That's an inversion. That's not our true sacred story. So I think in the last few decades, we've been finding our true sacred stories. No, it's eat of the tree. And in Egypt later, Sumer was earlier, they had many of the trees. Then in Egypt later, beautiful images of the goddess giving the fruit from the tree. She is the tree. She is the fiery essence of life, which is in every man and woman. So we're waking up, but we have been taught that we are nothing, that we're flawed. And we are waking up from that and saying, wait a minute, we don't want to be inflated. That's a step. Narcissism and inflation is a step that sometimes comes to us, but we go beyond that to realize we are all divine. And we are here to know who we are and to use all of those abilities to experience consciousness and create out of that loving consciousness. There's a myth in fact, it's a central myth in Egyptian spirituality, and she's called the fiery serpent goddess. And what they say is that if you desire her and love her, you have to love her, then you can create worlds of great beauty. But if you are not consciously tending and paying attention and you don't love her, she can destroy the whole world. And I think that's what we're seeing, the power that they realize that the power of love is the highest frequency there is. And the laws of love are the highest laws. And there are those laws that we have to create out of. If we don't, then the whole world can be destroyed. And we're in that place now because there are polarities in everything. We can destroy, we can create. We have to work with these polarities when we come into time and space. Otherwise, we don't have that tension and dialectic. Once we realize this, then we pay attention to the polarities of life. We work with our opposites, and they hone us and help us to understand the highest laws, which come from higher states of consciousness. That frequency, the frequency of love, if we create out of that, we can create anything we want to.
So as people start to like kind of come out from this and unpack it and figure out how to connect to their own divinity, I'm curious if someone's coming to you wondering, how do I unpack? Let's just use Christianity as the example. Someone had like a very strict, maybe Catholic upbringing, and they feel like they had to follow the rules of the book very closely. And now they're realizing maybe this isn't the path for me. Maybe I feel something else calling to me. What are actionable steps to connect more with your own consciousness and what feels more authentic to you?
That's good question, because some of the religions are they're so strong in teaching us that you don't know, and you can't go. It's everything is outside. There's a God outside of us. Oh, they talk about Jesus being within, but you better obey the outside, the orthodoxy, and not ask the questions. And so when you begin to, many people are lost at that point. They think, I don't buy this. This is nonsense. And I see what's going on here. And they kind of get lost. I think our whole culture, I don't go along with that, but I don't have anything else to go along with. But I think that's why shamanism has become important. It's like, can you help me with this? And certainly the sacred medicine and that sort of thing. But it's we also have a science of the heart now, which is heartmath.com. One can go to it. They have a lot of literature out. It's a scientific exploration of the heart. And so they have developed techniques that help us individually on our own, simple breathing exercises that helps us to go into the heart. There's one, you breathe in shorter time than you breathe out. You can kind of touch your heart to help you to know you're focusing on the heart. And if you focus on what you love, that frequency that begins to help you with the breath. And on one's own, one can make some real progress. But sometimes we've been so brainwashed, we've been so torn away from our source for so long that we do want help. And there are many people who are teaching different techniques of breathing on our own that we can do on our own. And a lot of people are doing that. I think that there is a myth about this particular thing is that when we get to the point that we think there's got to be more than this. There's something wrong here. What is the meaning of it all? When we begin to really, in our hearts, long to have an answer to that question, then we are told that the door to the labyrinth opens. Well, the labyrinth is a symbol of a journey that each of us can take individually when we get to that point, and we enter it, and it's not a maze. If we stay on the trail, we'll get to the center. But we're now in a highly focused uh, frame of consciousness. We're in there because we want to know. So we're asking questions, and we are co-creating with the biofield. And the biofield will feed back to us what we need to know. It also, we will attract people in our lives, and we will books and teachers, and it's different for each person. But if we stay with that, each of those experiences is teaching us what we need to know, the individual. And our ancestors said, if you stay on that path, you're going to meet helpers all the way on that path. And the one helper I love is the Russian Baba Yaga, is that you're just exhausted from the path and you don't know whether anything's happening and nothing. And she's there to help you. And so she takes care of you for a while, and then she sends you out again. But she throws a ball of thread or yarn in front of you, so you have that to follow. It's a wonderful symbolic way of saying your soul will bring to you what you need and give you the guidance that you need. Just stay with it, and what you need will bring to you, magnetically bring to you. The field and you now are highly focused. You're in a changed environment. And whatever you achieve, you're making it easier for the next person. And you're helping to change the field itself. And so then our ancestors tell us we go around and around down to our deepest selves, where we confront the divine, the other, the all, not as other, but as self. We realize we are it. As Alan Watts used to say, we are it. We are divine, and we have a divine responsibility. And realizing that, of course, changes everything.
You touched on symbolism in your explanation, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. This is just a personal experience I've been having, but I moved to Texas 6 months ago, and I keep seeing snakes. I have found 3 snakes near my building, and it was a thing that I was kind of joking, oh, maybe it's got to be a sign, there's got to be a reason this keeps happening to me specifically, because I live in the city, I am not in a rural area, and none of my friends who've been here for much longer than me, nobody's seeing
She's a
snakes.
snake.
Just the other day, I had this kind of I was driving down to San Antonio, and I passed something called like a snake farm, I guess it was like a zoo or something, and I had this thought to myself, I go, I would love to confront my fear of snakes. I think I'm ready to change my experience with them. And maybe next time I see one, I'm going to try to maybe not touch one in the wild, but like maybe I should go
No.
to this snake farm, and maybe I should kind of, like get over this fear. And I kid you not, like 2 hours later, I'm standing outside of this hotel in San Antonio, and this woman comes up with a snake around her neck.
Oh
And
my God.
I know.
No.
And I'm like, what is this?
Oh. Well, what do you think what does the snake, what does it do for you? What does, other than fear, what does it, is there any symbolism in it or anything that it brings up other than fear?
I mean, when I look into it just from like texts that I look up online and things, and everybody says that snakes are supposed to represent transformation, and I'm like, this must be what this means for me, because I just think it's comical, like the amount of them that I'm seeing, and then to actively be thinking I'm ready to like work through this fear of snakes, and then 2 hours later I'm confronted with one.
Oh yes. Well, I would, like you. I mean, with them, I and I had a friend. Actually, it's Maria Gimbutas, who's a archaeologist, and she would go out to the desert. And in Lithuania, where she was from, they loved them because it was a form of transformation and good luck when someone came into your. And I'm thinking, I don't want to come under my chair.
Yeah, right.
In fact, it was so much. And in shamanism, they always call Sachamama, the snake, to encircle, with her body, encircle the sacred space and ask for only the powerful, loving spirits to be present. For a long time, I would talk to Sachamama, and I would say, "I am just scared to death of you, and I don't want to do you any harm in the real world, and I don't want you to do me any. So I hope we don't meet in the real world." But I tried so hard to overcome that. I don't know that I have, if I would actually meet one, but yes, all over the Western world, at least, because they shed their skin, they are constantly changing, and the serpent is a symbol of the Kundalini energy rising up, this spiritual energy from the base of the spine, rising up and blossoming into the lotus in the brain, and then connecting with above. So it's like everything else, it has a powerful and a positive and negative side. But it probably you already figured that out, that you're ready to change in your attitude toward that, and it seems to be ready to meet you. This is a good example of the labyrinth. You've had an intention, and there it is, coming here, there, and yon. What it's going to mean, you probably will find out. If it means transformation, then you're continuing on in this labyrinth, and other things will happen that are transformative. But in a way, it's the ground level. Very often in our ancestors would have like a little sketch of a coiled snake at the bottom of the spine. And then as we begin to experience, it begins to rise all the way to the top of the brain. So that something's happening, some kind of transformation. And that's good.
It feels good. I like touching on it. You said serpent, so I was like, here we go again. Now I have to bring it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very interesting, even in that inverted story, it's the serpent in there who says to Eve and Adam, "Do you really think this is true, what they're telling you about this?" Because he knows, or she knows, that's nonsense. And so, in a sense, as negative an image as it is, the serpent knows this is not true. You can eat of this tree, and you're not going to die. As a matter of fact, if you eat of it, you're eternal. You're immortal. It's kind of doesn't say it in those words, but it's the snake who knows a few things, so that's good.
If our consciousness is on this path and it's kind of going from one physical being into another, what's your theory on why we don't remember past lives?
Well, you asked a lot of good questions. That's I've thought a lot about that. I think in some ways it's good that we don't remember. Uh, because we come in and we can see everything in a completely new way, not the way we did in a last life, because we can get boxed in to certain ways of thinking or seeing or feeling. So we come in, we're completely have new experiences. In a way, people often look at it as a bad thing, that someone has done something terrible to us we can't remember. On the other hand, it gives us the ability to have a completely fresh view of things, a completely different way of looking at ourselves and others. And so we can create different worlds. I would like to think that there's a point at which we can know whatever it is we need to know of our past lives. And if we don't need to know it, that's okay too. But I know I often think, I don't think I want to come in and go to grade school again. I just think, I don't want to do that. So, but that's me talking. But if I come in with a whole different frame of mind, it might be very exciting. So I can create a lot of different things in grade school that I wouldn't with this consciousness, because I still have that old structure in my mind. So I think it can be creative. And when we need to know, I think we'll let ourselves know.
I like that interpretation a lot because it feeds into more of I like the clean slate part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I really like
Yeah.
so you're not bringing in your old structures and maybe some outdated beliefs that are coming from a different time and a different person.
Yes, and they do get outdated. I mean, the longer I live, the more sometimes I have to laugh when I look at something and I'm thinking, what's with that structure? And then I think, is this the person who's old, looking at it with all of these old ways of thinking and doing? Knock it off. We have to constantly try to shake loose from the structures. If they're creative, okay, keep them. But I've caught myself rather often lately in one that wasn't so creative, and I thought, okay, get rid of it, So if we come in without them, we don't have to do that kind of work right away.
True. What should we be doing to maybe not just strengthen our intuition, but read into it correctly? And how do we better use our intuition as guidance?
Yeah, good. Also a good question. Again, in Western culture, intuition was laughed at, made fun of. It belonged to women. Women would come up because women often were intuitive. I mean, we had different experiences. We had sometimes the time and time alone, and we could become pregnant, we could give birth, we were with children, we could see, and I think that a mother has deep intuition about her child, which is often ignored by doctors, although there are those doctors who are saying, pay attention to the mother, the millions of years of developing of that intuition. So when we know what intuition is, it helps us because it's a very interesting thing with the brain components. The right brain gives information to the left, and they both work beautifully together and flow through the heart. But in mysticism, we don't use any of those brain components. Those brain components can be hopped over, and suddenly we're in a place which neither of those components can enter. It's no time, no space, no it, no that. It's just a knowing. They call it pure spirit, pure being. And then it always flows into the archetypal world where the laws shape that being. So it exists without the left brain or right brain. And what happens with intuition is it's that consciousness that flows through us, and it doesn't use the left brain or the right brain necessarily. It just flows through the heart, and we suddenly know something. We know something, and we don't know how we got there. But we can skip those brain components and just be in touch with the cosmic consciousness or the consciousness of the heart, and we know something. So I think the first thing is knowing that and trusting it and believing, or maybe not believing, but if we have the experiences, we begin to know, yes, intuition is that consciousness, a higher state of consciousness that can flow through us. It doesn't have to come through the left or right. Sometimes we think it comes through the cells in our body. And in a way, we begin to realize the whole body has its own consciousness. And so it comes to us in many different ways. I've had sometimes something like in my body, sometimes I kind of know something, and I know kind of where it is that thinks it knows it, And so I think we have to just be aware of consciousness it's everywhere, and it can come we are biologically created in a way that consciousness can enter us through even the cells of our body. And when we know something, then pay attention to it and be open to it and watch it work itself out. But when it comes to children, I know a doctor talked about his wife, that how deeply intuitive she was. He said one time one of their daughters was down the street in the swimming pool playing with other kids, and suddenly she just ran out of the house and ran down the street and ran to the pool, and the daughter was in the pool drowning. They had looked away. She dived in the pool and saved the child's life. So in those cases, when you have that deep intuition, you don't question it. And there are other times when there's intuition and we think, where'd that come from? But I think attention must be given to it.
Absolutely. If you had to give a single book recommendation to someone who wants to expand their knowledge on this, to someone for whom their understanding of consciousness is pretty like novice, right? And they've listened to our conversation, they want to know more, what would you recommend?
Hey, the best possible book. I don't know that I can answer that. My own understanding came through the work of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist. I began to read his work. I didn't understand it, but it magnetically drew me to it. And he was always talking about consciousness. and dreams, that dreams are organized by the heart, by the psyche, and that if we enter into a conversation with them, we can learn more about ourselves. I don't think that Jung is necessarily the right person to go to now, although he's profound and he changed our culture. He really redirected our culture. I think that reading about near-death experiences is very good because it takes you away from the Western world of looking at just the left brain. And that helped me too. So I'm looking at my own experiences here to see. I read how millions and millions of people had an experience of the survival of consciousness when they were flatliners, dead. And then they were revived and came back, and they had not only memories, they had knowledge that they hadn't had before. And some of them had abilities. These latent or dormant abilities were awakened in them. And then all over the world. And not only that, but from different ages, different times, different cultures. So that, I think, is very helpful to give a sense of that there is something beyond the brain. In fact, in England, in the scientific and medical network, they have conferences every year on beyond the brain. And so that group has scientists and physicists, mystics, who know that consciousness does not need the brain to exist. It is, but it flows through the brain so that we can work with it here in time and space. So I think one might be interested in that organization, scientific and medical network.com. They have speakers incredible. When I was growing up, I never heard of such speakers, but mystics and scientists working together. But so many things are being discovered in our time. But a particular book, can you think of one, Kim, that I talk about on consciousness that would open someone up to? I think once again, an individual wants to know, they will find it. They're in the labyrinth, and the labyrinth will bring that to them. I read for years Carl Jung, and I paid attention to my dreams and wrote them down and thought about them. And of course, I taught literature, so I was always looking at other people's experiences and analyzing that. And I was led from Jung to near-death experiences. And then we had a Jung Society out here, and we were having all kinds of speakers come and talk about. So I am sorry that I cannot give one book, but there's so many out there. And it will come. It will come to the person who's seeking it. And that's the wonderful magic about it.
I like that. That's a great place to end it. I so appreciate you coming and talking to me about this. There's been quite a few things in this conversation that have blown my mind. So if people want to learn more about what you're doing or work with you, where should they go?
Well, they can go to the Kamlak Center. That's KAMLAK.com. And there are videos there, podcasts, articles, and also, if you want to sign up for our newsletter and find out what we're doing, you can do that. And also get a chapter from one of the books. The book I wrote about our sons dying and our experiences is The Miracle of Death. There's nothing but life. And then I went to the cultural view of it in Merchants of Light, the consciousness that is changing the world. So those two books could be helpful if one wants to know more. And I'm working on another one, which is Soul at the Crossroads, the Power of Heart Consciousness. And all of that would be on our website.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really enjoyed our chat.
Oh, I did too. Thank you. You had such good questions. So thank you so much.
Of course. And thank you everybody for listening. Bye. If you know somebody that would enjoy this episode, feel free to share it with them. And thank you for listening to Galina Ravina Podcastina, the show where I try to be the person my dog thinks I am. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. See you on the next one.